Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, Ambassador Murray, Ambassador Mayanin, delighted to see you. Ambassador Mayanin was posted to Dublin only literally a few months ago, after some time in Paris as Ambassador of Finland to the OECD, so nice to see you again. It's a great pleasure to be here in Ireland's leading European and International Affairs Policy Institute to share with you these views on the evolving relationship between the OECD and the G20. Among its distinguished speakers, the Institute have invited many high-level global decision makers. I was seeing the photo gallery down there, and national leaders. So it's a great opportunity to contribute to such an important series of events, but also it's a very great honor to share this podium with such distinguished speakers of the last few years. G20 is fast becoming the centerpiece of today's international economic, social, and environmental governance architecture. And it's important. It's not just economics. The social issues are going to take an increasingly important profile, and of course, environment now in the agenda of this weekend's Ministers of Finance. First point of order of the day, climate change financing by the Ministers of Finance. So this is the G20 Ministers of Finance getting together. So it's I would say without no strategic, no defense, no military issues, but other than that, practically anything that moves and more will be put in the agenda as the G8 and the G20 merge over the years. Although I was told yesterday that the G8 is giving signs of resisting and not wanting to die. So we'll see. Yes, it is a very heterogeneous group, this G20. Yet the progress achieved so far, of course, is incomplete. We have much more progress in some areas than we have in others. We'll see about that. But one has to recognize that its capacity to deliver has been outstanding, given the circumstances. It took a little long to get started, but once they got started, they did it well. At a moment when we were facing critical challenges, the G20 came up with a coordinated response to the decline in global activity and to stabilize markets. It is now focusing on the very important issue of exit strategies from the massive public interventions, and among other medium and long-term issues, on how to address climate change financing, as I mentioned. OECD has been supporting the G20 Summit since its inception. Our substantive contribution includes work on new sources of growth, the human and social dimension of the crisis, labor particularly, the jobs crisis, innovation, open markets for trade and investment, which are threatened under the circumstances, and on the exchange of information for tax purposes, the so-called question of tax havens. And it is quite significant that leaders felt they had to call on relevant international organizations to address the worst economic crisis ever. Leaders identify key issues in the global agenda and call on us, the international organizations, to provide advice to address them. Through evidence-based analytical inputs, we at the OECD and the other organizations ensure that countries that do not participate directly at the G20 stay connected with the discussions. The OECD is strongly committed to the notion that countries such as Ireland can have, through the OECD, an additional channel by which your voice can be heard. This role will remain central to our efforts. In Pittsburgh, in the last G20 meeting at the leaders, we reported on areas where, based on OECD work, the world has achieved important breakthroughs. The case of the exchange of information for tax purposes, where since November 2008, we have made more progress than in the 10 years before that. A real revolution. We have just established the most ambitious peer review process, including more than 90 countries, ready to measure compliance based on OECD standards on the exchange of tax information. We also work to keep markets open to trade and investment and contributed to a new approach to the regulation and supervision of the financial sector through our participation in the now called Financial Stability Board. We will also establish a peer review process to evaluate compliance with the OECD principles of corporate governance. That we do that on a regular basis. We check on corporate governance. If somebody wants to, there are further places here. 2 or 3. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, this is fine. So, as I said, the corporate governance issue is very important because what was the crisis about? Well, the crisis was about a massive regulatory failure, a massive failure in the supervision, but also a massive failure on the corporate governance side, that's a private sector responsibility, and a massive failure on risk management. Again, it's part of the private sector. The two first ones, regulatory and supervisory, all are in the public domain, but corporate governance and risk management failures are on the side of the private sector. Failure to implement those principles of corporate governance produced this massive breakdown we've experienced. Now, the most dramatic expression of the crisis is the level of unemployment, of which we have also worked in the context of the G20. Our mandate is to monitor labor developments and the impact of certain policies, what works better and what doesn't work. There is a need to continue supporting workers through the stimulus packages, but in a long-term perspective, it is also important to invest in skills development and retraining. Thus, the OECD was asked to contribute to the labor ministerial that the US will host in early 2010. The Americans are calling for a ministerial on labor. Well, we just had a ministerial on labor of the OECD countries, and we invited also our 10 members that are negotiating accession and the members, the large emerging economies with which we have what we call an enhanced engagement with a view to possible membership. There's China, Brazil, India, South Africa, Indonesia, etc. They were all present in our labor conference of end of September, only a few days ago. And the G20 said, build on that, work on that, so that this can be fed into the meeting that we're going to have early in 2010. So that's another area, another angle of the work we're doing in the G20. In Pittsburgh, OECD work on these areas was welcome, and we were asked to continue to work on them. It's usually, normally we just say is that we take note, thank you very much, it's very important, it helps us to do the policy, etc. But keep at it, keep reporting on it. And we do it, for example, we report on labor together with the ILO. We report on labor together with the WTO. They check whether people are being protectionist on trade. And we check whether people are being protectionist on investment policies. So we keep an eye to keep them all, on the straight and narrow, but we divide depending on our comparative advantages. We can patrol investment policies a lot better because we've been at it for several decades. The ILO can do that better for certain aspects of the jobs. We also were asked to continue our work on energy subsidies and the impact of the removal in the demand and the prices of energy, and also on the greenhouse gas emissions. This was a very important area where we joint work with the OECD and the IIEA, the International Energy Agency, was a basis for an agreement among participating countries. Our estimates on greenhouse gas reductions resulting from the removal of subsidies for the consumption of fossil fuel-based energy is that it could be as much as 10% by 2050, 10% of all the emissions. Very important. It was extensively quoted, including by the Secretary of the Treasury and the President of the United States when we were in Pittsburgh, and they were alluding to this work. Now, additionally, and based on OECD work, leaders also asked us to work on the adoption and enforcement of laws against transnational bribery. And because we do have an instrument already, because of the anti-bribery convention, which is already 10 years old, actually 11 years old, I think, by now. It's 11 years old since it was signed, and 11 years old since it was ratified and came into effect. the anti-bribery convention, which basically is cross-border type. Is it when the companies in one particular country will go out there and bribe officials in third countries in order to do business and get mandates and get orders. Just to give you an idea, a few years ago, bribes were deductible. Not only were they not crime, they were deductible. Well, now they're not deductible anymore. In most of the countries, they're a crime. Actually, we have very important countries, including one that you're very related to, for historical reasons, that is now working on a new version of their anti-bribery law. So that we work on these things, but then the G20 called on work on this. Agreed to continue also to work on the Charter for Sustainable Economic Activity, the so-called Global Charter, which Angela Merkel proposed. This is a better framework on how to do business, because it's perceived that obviously there's something very bad, badly missing. And also the Italians said the Lecce framework, the so-called ethics, transparency, integrity, and what's the other? It's propriety. Those are the three words. The Italians, this is Tremonti, the Minister Tremonti, proposed that we do a sort of like a code of ethics for the conduct of business. Again, it was perceived that this was missing. It is, of course. And these are two different ambitions. The Lecce framework, more specific on ethics, and the Global Charter, the Angela Merkel, a much broader playing field. So we're working on that. Now, on the way forward, the G20 is also paving the way to build a stronger, more balanced, and sustainable growth process. This is probably one of the major breakthroughs, one of the major achievements in Pittsburgh. This will be discussed at the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors in St. Andrews this weekend, actually. The framework, so-called framework for balanced, sustained, and stronger growth, it can be seen as a compact that commits countries to work together to assess the coherence of national policies and their consistency with the common objectives agreed at the G20 level. Basically, it's like, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And then that when we reach normality, when we do, that we make the most out of the normality. We leverage the cooperation and the information and the strengthening, the reinforcement of the policies. How do we get this? Well, this is what it's all about. So it's very ambitious, it's very promising, it's very difficult. There are a lot of reticences. Countries don't want to be, peer-reviewed by the others, et cetera, et cetera. But here, again, the OECD has made several concrete proposals to the G20 on this framework and how we can adapt our ongoing work program to support the implementation. We are actually about peer reviews. We do everything through peer review process at the OECD. We peer review 25 countries every year. We peer review on environment policies. We peer review on education policies. We peer review on health policies. So basically what they're trying to do here, we're telling the G20, hey, don't reinvent the wheel. We got it here. Come and take whatever you think is useful and we'll contribute. You don't have to set up anything totally new, and set up the whole thing all over again. Just let's adjust a little bit the work that we're doing, and we'll, together with the IMF, the World Bank, and the other organizations, we can contribute. We even propose the creation of something called the Observatory for Policy Coherence, which basically is a grandiose name to describe something which Angela Merkel in 2007, in December, called us the head of the World Bank, the head of the IMF, myself, the head of the WTO, and the head of the ILO. Pascal Lamy, Somavia, Bob Zelig, Strauss-Kahn, and myself, say, well, how can you coordinate better so that you're more coherent and that you can serve us better? And I think there's a design problem with the governance of the world, in the sense that we have this silo thing, every organization is mandated to do something about something specific. The only ones who are not like that is the OECD, simply because we have mandates on, well, about 100 different things. And we will do nanotechnology, and we will do, education, we'll do health, we will do economics, and we'll do taxes, and we'll do the environment, but that's, we're expected to do that. We're supposed to do that. We have directors that are dedicated to do that. We put out our flagship publications, and we contribute to policy making for our member countries, etc. However, well, only today. Today I'm going to deliver the economic survey of Ireland, but also I'm going to deliver our recommendations and conclusions on the environmental performance review, just today in Ireland. It's a nice example of the kinds of things that go on at the OECD. So we said, well, let's get together. The world today is made of networks. The internet is a big network, and Facebook is a big network, and everything is a network except the organizations, the international organizations. They still are standing alone, impenetrable, doing this. If it's labor, it has to be the ILO in Geneva, and if it's trade, it has to be. But we don't cross-pollinate each other. We don't give our opinion on some of the macro issues that the IMF and the World Bank do on poverty, and they don't give their opinion of what we do on some structural issues. So this can be improved. It's part of the governance of the world. It would have to be improved. But still today, I notice, and I'm worried about the fact that we're going back to, again, mandating specifically, again, the same institutions that didn't do such a brilliant job, frankly, in the problems that we have today. And I think we can improve on that. We can improve on this coordination. So I call it the Observatory for Policy Coherence, or Policy Assessment Network among key international organizations, so that we can each... and then if we recommend things, the 5 of organizations recommend things, or if we need to call in the energy guys, or we need to call in the nuclear guys, or we need to call in Interpol, whoever we have to call in, and then we make a recommendation, it'll be very difficult to ignore us, because our voice will be rather formidable. And we will best serve our masters, our shareholders, the same countries, basically the same countries. So, while taking into account the comparative advantage of each organization, this idea of the observatory would allow for different perspectives. Not about duplicating efforts, it's about being complementary. The messages of the international organizations would become reciprocally reinforcing and better coordinated and louder, I should say. Ladies and gentlemen, the crisis has accelerated the speed at which the global governance architecture has to be updated and revamped. The G20 is an important step forward in such a process, and the OECD is ready to contribute to its success. Thank you very much. Thank you.